Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Catholics Against Militarism podcast. We have back with us today Father Emmanuel Charles McCarthy, who has asked me to address him as Charlie, as I normally do. So I'll be doing that going forward. And the subject of today's podcast is Edith Stein and a miracle. Edith Stein was a German Jewish woman who was born on October 12th, 1891. As a teenager, she became an atheist, and by the time she was in her 20s, she was one of the most brilliant philosophers of her time. She eventually converted to Catholicism and became a Carmelite nun, and ended up dying at Auschwitz on August 9th, 1942. She has a special connection with our guest, Charlie, whose youngest daughter was named after her. He named his youngest daughter Benedicta, who was at the time Theresa Benedicta of the Cross. That was her religious name that she took. And in 1997, young Benedicta ingested a lethal amount of Tylenol, and the doctors thought that she would die. But after Charlie and his wife set up a prayer tree and prayed for the intercession of Theresa Benedicta of the Cross, a miracle happened, and his youngest daughter was cured. The Catholic Church started investigating this incident, and 10 years later, in 1997, after determining that this was indeed a legitimate miracle, Theresa Benedicta of the Cross was made Saint Theresa Benedicta of the Cross. So I'm really excited to have Charlie here to talk about this story. Charlie, I have to tell you, when I first met you and started hearing about all this nonviolent stuff, I kind of thought you were crazy. I'm not going to lie. I had never heard it before. I thought it was bizarre. And your friend Bob talked to me about this miracle, and he mentioned it. And I have to say, it made me give everything a little bit of a closer look as to what you had been up to with your life and what had been going on in your life and what you were preaching. So my first question would be, what drew you to Theresa Benedicta of the Cross? Because you were drawn to her, long before she was ever a saint. So I thought you could tell me a little bit about that.
Well, Ellen, when you first attended one of my retreats, you thought I was crazy.
Well, I mean, not crazy.
Well, I know you don't mean asylum crazy. I know you mean crazy in terms of the norms of culture that you have been raised in and had been nurtured in and had lived in all your life.
Absolutely. And I remember the first time that we talked, I thought I was going to stump you. I said, well, Charlie, what about war? As if you had never given these things any thought. as if you were just a little off your rocker. And I thought I was going to come up with these questions that you had never thought of before. And clearly, I came to find out that wasn't the case. But it was so bizarre to me. It was so foreign. I didn't know what to make of it.
Let me tell you, Ellen, your reaction is the reaction of pretty much all bishops and priests and ministers and pastors in the church, as well as their congregations. No one, what Jesus is saying about violence and enmity and a few other things, but violence and enmity is what we're focused on here, which includes, of course, war and torture and capital punishment and killing people. Well, what your initial experience was the experience of someone who has been nurtured from the cradle in the belief that sure, you can go out and kill people if they're going to kill you, or hurt people if they're going to hurt you, or maybe even if they're not going to hurt you, just to get what you want to get done. So, no, the fact that you thought I was a little unsound of mind is no surprise at all. Yes, I understand that completely. And now let me add one more point, just from what you said. See, you see how your little commentary just adds hours to the program as I comment on your commentary. So,
right.
What your experience was, you say, when you heard about the miracle of Edith Stein, honest to heavens, I thought that was going to be the experience of the whole church in terms of nonviolence when they heard about the miracle of St. Edith Stein being in relationship to me.
Charlie,
It wasn't. It
yeah,
was not.
and I want to talk about that because I was just sitting out just before the interview in my little Marion garden, petting my cat, looking at the beautiful fall leaves, and I was listening to a lecture given at Boston College by a Carmelite, and he mentioned Benedicta, your daughter, and the miracle. He did not mention you. It was just another one of those times where I'm thinking to myself, you'd think in a lecture on Edith Stein and how she became a saint, your life and what you've done with your life and the message you've been preaching might come into play, but it was just Benedicta was mentioned, and she was a young girl who lived outside of Boston, and that was it. So I'm just excited that you can tell the whole story today. But I thought maybe we should start with what Theresa did, or Edith Stein, when she was on Earth, and then move on to what she did from heaven. What do you think
Well,
of that? Or do you want to start somewhere else?
what you heard listening to uh, CD today or whenever it was in relationship to Edith Stein and mentioning my daughter Benedicta and so forth, and being mum that Edith Stein had a father who was a priest and who was married and who for the prior 20 or 30 years, every day of his life has spent 24/7 teaching, reading, studying, writing, lecturing on gospel nonviolence as the teaching of Jesus and trying to call the churches back to it. When coverage of this came, the secular papers like the Washington Post, New York Times, and I've got stuff here from all over the globe, from India and Taiwan and so forth. They all thought that was kind of interesting, that it was a married priest in the Catholic Church, legitimately married priest, Byzantine, and that this is what he was known for. This is what he spent his life on, just teaching this, whether in sermons or retreats or conferences or whatever the case may be, and had been for over 30 years. They thought that possibly the miracle was in some way, shape, or form was meant to underline what he was doing, or punctuate it, or suggest to Christians or to the church or to the church leaders that maybe that this is something you should look at, because we have to assume that miracles come from God and they're part of God's design for the salvation of the world and souls, and that he doesn't just arbitrarily decide one day to here's a miracle. I'm going to give this person a miracle, but no, it has to be the enormity of the plan of God. Miracles and who receives them are as significant as who God chose to be Jesus' mother. That wasn't just an arbitrary decision. Now, if there's no God, that's one thing. But if God is who the Judeo-Christian tradition says he is, if God is Father, if God is Logos, if God has purpose and he created his whole universe and each one of us for some reason that's far, far beyond us, nevertheless, he himself has a reason for choosing Mary to be the mother of Jesus, and he himself has a reason for choosing the daughter of a Byzantine Catholic priest who is married and who teaching nonviolence as the way of the gospel, the way of Jesus, and the way that every Christian in church is called to for 30 years. However, Ellen, it didn't happen that way. The secular press covered that part of it, and the religious press, and by the religious press, I mean the Catholic press, or the Christian press, Catholic for the most part, never said a word about it. Not a word.
I mean, when you think about the whole, I mean, it's probably pretty rare anyway for the miracle that would sort of end up making someone a saint to take place in the United States. I mean, these things happen all over the world. So that in itself, you would think, would at least make the Catholic media in the United States take notice.
Do you know, Ellen, that every major television network, major and cable network, contacted me for interviews on this, and because they wanted to interview me, they wanted to interview Benedicta, they wanted to interview my wife Mary, as well as the doctors from Harvard on the case, etc. No, well, let me just say it. EWTN never even called. Never called. And now ABC did a whole 1 hour program on it, which I sent to you the other day.
Right, which is the whole reason I didn't know the anniversary of her canonization, which is October 11th, was coming up until Jim sent out that email. And now the ABC program is on YouTube for the first time. So I will link to that so people can watch that. The ABC program, it was a Nightline or something that did a session on it. I thought they did a very good job too.
Yeah, it takes a miracle is the name of the thing. Yes, they did. Yeah. But the point is, national television, international radio. In other words, I got calls to go on international radio from Ireland, the international press in India, and front page story, India and China. I got the clippings here. Europe. Not a word on EWTN.
That's very strange, to say the least. It reminds
me one time, I'm just going to say this because I just think it's important to say, because EWTN has such an influence.
They do, yeah.
And there's much of what they do that is not the whole story of what Catholicism is. And they lead people to think it is the whole story of what Catholicism is. But many years ago, I'll tell you when, it was August 1988, I did a television show in Belfast, Ireland, studio television show, 1 hour television show, with Father George Zabilka, who was the Catholic chaplain of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bomb crew, and with Mairead Corrigan Maguire, who is the Catholic Nobel Prize winner from Northern Ireland, and myself. And the three of us did the program, just entitled Christian Nonviolence. The three of us did the 1 hour, 56-minute program, whatever those things are, in August of 1988. Now, we sent that program, network quality, sent that program to EWTN. And their response to us was, we only put Catholic material on our station. Baloney. They put a very select kind of Catholic material on their station. And by putting only half the truth on there, they're misleading so many Catholics as to what the whole truth is.
Right. I mean, officially, they say that, a Christian can choose to renounce violence and be nonviolent, as many of the martyrs did, or they can follow just war theory, and that they're both fine. But then when you do take the gospel nonviolence option seriously and try to talk about that, it's called out for being not Catholic because it's not just war theory.
And believe me, it's not just EWTN. Not just EWTN. It's almost like in Catholic media in general, there is an embargo. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I just mean it's an embargo that's the result of the same kind of consciousness that you had when you first heard me. That is it's a consciousness of a piece of the Catholic tradition that's orthodox and absolutely part of the church being heard. There's an embargo on it from the pulpit, embargo in terms of teaching in seminaries, Embargo in terms of teaching in grammar school, high school, and college. And what I mean by that is it's not taught. And when anything is taught about it, it's taught so unsystematically and chaotically and episodically that no one could take it seriously.
And
so,
almost
for example,
anecdotally, like
anecdotally. So
this person
always there's stories about Dorothy Day or Martin Luther King or Gandhi or something like that, huh?
Individuals who made a kind of an eccentric choice or something.
But the systematic presentation, a theological presentation, a spiritual presentation at the level that the particular audience can hear it, from preschool to PhD to seminary, that is not done anywhere. But as far as that's very seldom done. Let me say that. Anyway, what that comes down to is people making a decision. And by people, I mean bishops for the most part, but also priests and not just in the Catholic Church, certainly in the other churches, ministers and so forth, making a decision that they can truncate Jesus' teaching. They can cut pieces out. And I ask, by what authority? They have no authority to do that. For example, I'm a Catholic priest, say, and it's my task to teach the 7 sacraments, all 7 of them. Now, I may not particularly like, because of the history of it, at least in the last 1,000 years, the sacrament of penance, confession, what we call reconciliation now. I may not particularly like that, and I may think the way I don't want it, Well, I can't cut that out of my teaching of the sacraments. I can't teach 6 sacraments and keep out the one I don't want. And therefore, no one in the Catholic Church, whether it be the Pope or anyone else, has the right to truncate, cut out a piece of Jesus' teaching. Now, just one more thing on that. The way they cut it out is they cut it out by de-emphasis. What was the fellow's name that wrote from Harvard there, that wrote the great work on, it's titled Christopher Columbus, Admiral, Samuel Eliot Morison. He writes 460 pages on Columbus, 460 pages. And along about page 362, he has one sentence. Of course, Columbus committed genocide. One sentence. Genocide is worth one sentence.
Wow. Yeah.
And understanding that. See, so if he didn't put that in there, his contemporaries, his scholarly contemporaries in history would say, hey, wait a minute, you said nothing about that. He put it in there, and he de-emphasized it to the point of non-existence. That's what's done with gospel nonviolence, not just in the Catholic Church, but in all the churches. And so, and so, I think it's very, very important that people realize this, that serious information about Jesus' teaching and the seriousness of his teaching, if he is not just a philosopher, as George Bush called him, but if he is the living word of God who is communicating the definitive will of God by his words and deeds, then taking out something of what he so clearly said and did is, let's put it this way, if it's done intentionally, it's evil. If it's done unintentionally, then it is, what would you say, non-culpable negligence. In most cases, at the level of the folks in the pew, I think it's that is non-culpable ignorance. They just never hear of it. But at the level of church leadership, I think it's intentionally being cut out from pulpits, from newspapers, et cetera, And yeah. I think it raises some serious moral questions in terms of what in the name of God they're doing and how they think they're leading the church by not communicating some of Jesus' clearest of teachings.
Yeah, and I don't want to. Yeah, and I think I do want to talk about Edith Stein and her life, but I should
Okay, let's
mention.
go to Edith Stein. Let's go to
Okay,
Edith Stein. Just we'll stop there, and I've got about 5 more hours to say on this, but we'll stop there. We'll go to Edith Stein.
okay, and I'm going to come back to that because I want to explain your profile picture for the YouTube watchers because you're in that profile picture. You are celebrating the canonization mass with John Paul II, and I would like to come back to this issue of how you ended up doing that. But
Sure.
so what drew you to Teresa when she was just, Theresa Benedicta of the Cross, and why did you become interested in her in the first place? And why did you name your daughter after her?
Well, as you know from the article that I sent you, along with that video from ABC on the canonization of Edith Stein, and it's the only article I ever wrote on the subject of the canonization. God arranged my interest in her. Growing up in an Irish Catholic family in Boston, I knew almost nothing about her. I'd say I knew nothing about her. I mean, I couldn't tell Edith Stein from Gertrude Stein. But later on in life, as you get older and you say when you're at college or something, you hear the name Edith Stein and didn't know what she was, who she was. She was just another star in the Catholic galaxy of people, Well, anyway, we've got to at this point. We've at this point here. The way it turned out is I used to be the spiritual director of St. Gregory the Theologian Seminary, Byzantine Catholic Seminary, and I was preparing a retreat in January of 1983, I think it was, maybe off on which January 1983, on for the seminarians. It was to be the retreat that they come back from Christmas vacation for. And I was reading and listening to tapes and doing all the things you do to try to prepare it well. And by the way, not leaving out in an instant Jesus' teaching of nonviolence from the retreat, although presenting it in the context of the whole Catholic faith and theological tradition. Well, anyway, I came across, in preparing for that retreat, I came across the fact that Edith Stein died on August 9th of 1942, at Auschwitz on August 9th, 1942. And it kind of stunned me, I mean, I don't know how you talk about these things, but I just stopped for a moment and thought about, wow, that's something. Why? Because I have been for all my life a great devotee of, in the best sense of the word, and living under the protection of St. Theresa of Lisieux, the little flower. And I remember that when she signed her paper, when she took her final vows, it was for the salvation. She was going to become a Carmelite. As I remember the text, it was for the salvation of souls and to pray for priests. And I thought, well, I think all Carmelites kind of have that same general broad intention, pray for priests. And so I thought, well, I saw where Edith Stein was a Carmelite, Discalced Carmelite, like St. Teresa, and I thought about it. So anyway, I said, but that's really bizarre. August 9, 1941, too. So I went home and I looked in another encyclopedia here. And sure enough, there it was. Auschwitz, August 9th, 1942, Edith Stein dies. So I said, I'm going to look into this. Now, why did I say I was going to look into this? Well, August 6th and August 9th for my adult life have been very important days, long before I was a priest. because they were the days that Hiroshima and Nagasaki occurred. And long before I was a priest, I used to, every August 6th and 9th, I used to be involved in some kind of nonviolent demonstration in relationship to August 6th and August 9th, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. One year we released the little Japanese tiny little boats on Charles River with candles in them. Another year we spent the whole night down at the famous Faneuil Hall in Boston, surrounded by some candles and praying, and all quite reserved and no law breaking or anything like that at all. But the 6th and the 9th, I was always, those days were always important. As a matter of fact, one August 6th and 9th, I happened to be out in Iowa, and long before I was a priest, long before, I used to go to mass every day. So I went down to the local church in a country town in Iowa for the morning mass at 7 o'clock or whatever it was. And when it came time, this would have been in the 70s, and when it came time to, people would be saying, petitions, whatever petition you want, just mention it. And I remember praying at the 6th and 9th mass for the people of Hiroshima and the people of Nagasaki and those who destroyed them. And just like you would expect, kind of everyone turned and looked, what are you doing? What's this all about, But anyway, I tell you that because after the decision was made by the patriarch of the Melkite Church, who at that time was Maximus V Hakim, and the Archbishop of the Melkite Church in the United States, Joseph Tawil, that I should go to the Middle East and be ordained a Catholic priest there for the Byzantine diocese, the Melkite diocese of the United States. The date was set up that I was supposed to go on January 26th of 1981. And as it turned out, due to some impossible circumstances to overcome, I couldn't go on January 26, 1981. And I remember that it created my not saying after, it created a fury among certain hierarchs and priests. The understanding in their minds was that I was disrespecting the patriarch. He agreed to do it. He set it up in Cairo on January 26th, and here I'm not going. But the circumstances that I had to deal with at the moment were extreme. Couldn't be done. So it was generally understood you just kiboshed your chances for being ordained a priest in the Melkite Church.
Oh, wow.
That was what was understood, because now I had no support. Well, anyway, 6 months later, I had at that point, because it was so clear that this was all over, I had at that point given in my resignation as working at the seminary, but I did stay on to teach in the deacon program that year, which was at our seminary. So the rector of the seminary came to me one day and said, I know your class is at 10 o'clock, but the patriarch is here in the United States, and he wants to use the room that you use, which is a big room, dining room kind of affair. And he'd like to use it for a press conference. And so I said, sure, we can wait. We can wait till he finishes and we'll start an hour later or whatever it takes. We'll just. So we did. Students and I sat out in the kitchen, and he had his press conference, and the press were there, and people talking about Middle East problems and all that sort of business there. And that was that. Because at that time, that year of 1981, one of the reasons for the press conference was that some that some radical group had shot at the patriarch and had the bullet had gone into his car, but it creased his head. So he just missed being killed. And so anyway, he had his press conference. And the press conference is over and everyone, the press leaves and all that sort of business there. He had parked his car, or actually his chauffeur parked his car in the back of the seminary instead of the front. So he came out of the conference, and when he came out, he decided to walk through the kitchen where I and the students were. And of course, everyone stood up and said, hi, and how are you, and all the stuff, and he talked to everyone. He was an extraordinary man, Maximus V. He absolutely was an extraordinary human being. And anyway, he came to me, and I said, "You be attitude. I'm Charlie McCarthy," and he said, "Oh, you're the man I was supposed to ordain in Cairo, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." Then he said to me, Ellen, "Are you still interested in being ordained?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, come over to the bishop's residence tomorrow morning and we'll talk about it." And anyway, after going over the next morning, talking about it, he said to me, "I will ordain you. Come to Damascus," not Cairo now. Damascus is where the Patriarchate's major house is. Come to Damascus in the first week of August, and I will ordain you. So I get to Damascus on August 1st, and I go to see the Patriarch. He's not in town. No one knows when he's coming in town. I go August 2nd to his place, his residence. He's not in town. No one said. August 3rd, I go. He's not in town. August 4th, I go. He's not in town. And I go on August 5th, and he had just come back from Lebanon. And I meet with him. And he said, he said, "Well, we talked and we chatted and blah, blah, blah. We went on for about an hour." And then he said, you've been ordained to all the minor orders, so I have to ordain you to the diaconate and to the priesthood. And he said, between the diaconate and the priesthood, there has to be 72 hours. And he looked at his calendar. And he says, "And if I ordain you to diaconate tomorrow, then I can ordain you Sunday to the priesthood." And I said, yes. He said, "Well, that'll be fine with me." He said, we'll pick you up at your place where you're staying, and we'll do that. I walked out of the place, and I had walked maybe a half mile when all of a sudden it occurred to me, Thursday and Sunday were the 6th and the 9th of August.
Wow.
I was ordained on the 9th of August in 1981 in Damascus. That's why when I saw the Edith Stein reference in the encyclopedia and in the stuff I was preparing for the retreat, when I saw she was murdered at Auschwitz on August 9th of 1942, I stopped in my tracks because I knew Carmelites pray for priests.
Wow.
At that point there, I got every piece. I went and I got every piece of literature I could find on Edith Stein in English. I think she has something like 50 volumes in German, but this is 1981. I found one book that was actually published on it, a marvelous book called "A Scholar and the Cross," by a woman by the name Helen Grafe was the last name. Excellent book, written in 48 or something like that, or early on. And then nothing else. Everything else was, I had to Xerox it, as they said in those days. I had to Xerox it out of the Harvard Library. There were a few other things out, pamphlet kind of things, small books. A lot of her writings, including the Science of the Cross and other things, but they were in the Harvard Library. And you couldn't take them out, so I Xeroxed them page upon page. I read them all. I knew Edith Stein inside and out. And then that what should we say? That summer, my wife and I were expecting a child. We knew it was going to be a girl because of the ultrasound. And I was talking to her about Edith Stein and so forth and so on. Edith Stein is not even beatified at this point. And I'm talking to her, and so we decided that this is just a good person. This is just a good Christian person, you know? And so we decided to name my daughter, who was going to be born, after Edith Stein, her religious name, Theresa, Theresa, TresesiA, I should point out, IA, Theresa Benedicta, which was Edith Stein's religious name, Theresa Benedicta Acruce. So time goes on, and my daughter Benedicta is late in arriving. And we call her Benedicta because when Edith Stein was in the convent, it seems like a lot of the Carmelites, because of Teresa of Avila, used the first name Theresia, as a lot of nuns and use Mary as a first name, you know, Mary Joseph, Mary this. Yeah. And so we used the second name, Benedicta, to talk to in normal times. And we found out that's how Edith Stein was referred to among the sisters in the convent, Benedicta. That's how she signed her letters, Benedicta. And so we waited, and as things turned out, Benedicta was born, and we were both quite conscious of this, very, very conscious of it. Benedicta was born on August 8th of 1984, I guess it was. She was born August 8th, 1984, at 8:45 in the evening, which we were very conscious was August 9th, Auschwitz time.
Wow.
So we named Benedicta, we baptized the Theresa Benedicta, etc., and life went on. Life just went on, as a child. She was our 12th child. And then one day, when she was just 2 years old, little kid.
Before we get to that part, I thought it might be interesting to talk, since we just talked about this fascinating that Benedicta was born on August 9th, Auschwitz time. I was wondering if we could talk about St. Theresa Benedicta's birthday, because she was born on Yom Kippur. And I was just I think it's really interesting, the significance of that in the Jewish calendar. Would you mind explaining that? It seems significant.
Yeah, Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year in the Jewish calendar. It comes in September or October. The Jewish religious world does not use the same calendar as the Christian or the Buddhist or the Mayan. They have their own calendar, and they don't use a civil calendar either for religious matters. So it falls in September differently, different days in our calendar, between September and October. And it's the Day of Atonement, and it's the holiest of holy days in the Jewish year. It's hard to get a feel for it, but it is a day, like, I don't know what to say, like Easter in the Catholic Church, where people don't have anything to do with the synagogue for all year. But on Yom Kippur, they go. That sort of thing, you know? And it's not just that they go out of duty. It's a real understanding that this is the Day of Atonement, the day when through prayer and fasting and the other things of the day, God forgives people of their sins, etc. And it's just a holy, holy day. it means, I guess, if you in Hebrew, I believe it means putting a cover over something. So all the sins of the past year and all the terrible stuff one may have done for the past year is all covered up, you know. And in the book of Leviticus, it was the day in which a scapegoat was sent out into the desert. You know, the priest put his hand on the scapegoat and hand represented all the people. And he was sent out into the desert to, with all the sins of the people, you know, and now the atonement was, it was understood that he was dying out in the desert for the atonement of all his people. But it is the holiest day of the Jewish year. And Edith Stein, who was born on that day, by the way, as we just said, in 1891, Edith Stein's mother. Now, I read this in one of the books that I read on Edith Stein, one of the, I don't know, 8 or 9 books I read on biography. She actually continued to fast that day, even though she was having a baby. And so Edith Stein's family was Orthodox. They were Orthodox Jews. They weren't Reformed Jews or conservative Jews. They were Orthodox Jews. And her mother was a strict Orthodox Jew. So this day was embedded in the consciousness of that Jewish family very, very severely, very, very sensitively, you know, and so forth and so on. And so, of course, when Edith Stein took the name Theresa Benedicta a Cruce, Cruce, C-R-U-C-E, is cross. And it's for Catholics, for Christians. So the Day of Atonement, capital T-H-E, once and for all atonement, is Good Friday. Jesus dying on the cross. Jesus atones for the sins of humanity in a mystery that's not altogether, that we almost have made trite, but he atones for the sins of humanity by dying on the cross. And that does not mean that God wants people to suffer or wants his son to be killed before he'll forgive humanity. It means something altogether different. But atonement, if you take the word atonement and you split it up, it is split up by its letters. It means at one-ment. At one-ment. People are brought back to unity with themselves, unity with God, unity with the community. So that's the day that Edith Stein, the holiest day of the year, Edith Stein was born on, and she when she was arrested in Echt, Holland by the Nazis and taken out of the Carmelite convent in 1942 in July, or first part of August, I guess, 1942, her sister was living in the convent with her, Rosa, and she had become a Catholic. And the last words that people heard Edith Stein say to Rosa as they were being taken out of the convent by the Gestapo, were, let us go now for our people. Meaning, you know, we are going to participate in the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, and we are going there for the good of all our people. And it should be noted that when Edith Stein signed her document as to what she wanted from her life in the Carmelite convent, one of the things she put in there was for peace among people. At any rate, that's what the Day of Atonement is. I actually have the full text in Hebrew and in English. I can't read Hebrew, but English of both side by side here in the house. And at Day of Atonement, I read the text because they're powerful text. I mean, in fact, I still say one of the prayers that said over and over again on that day,
What
restore.
text is this, Charlie?
Huh?
What text is it that you
Oh,
read?
I got the whole text for all the services the Day of Atonement in one book that I bought. And
What services? Like Jewish services?
the Jewish services, yes.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yes,
So what,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
what do they say?
But,
Can you summarize it for us?
yeah, some no. Well, the book is about 170 pages. Maybe more than that because it has the Jewish text on one side and the English text on the other side. Uh, but it's just and I can't really get the feel of it because I know, for example, the first service called Nadea was. I understand from everyone that I talked to that's Jewish and about this that first service is an extraordinary sounding reality that gets into your soul. But of course, I've never been there, never heard it. But the prayers are very, very powerful. And I was in 1989. I was actually in Old City Jerusalem on for the Day of Atonement, because in August of 1989, the Day of Atonement was August 9th. And I was there completing the annual fast that I do to call the churches back to gospel nonviolence. Been doing it for 30 years and plus. But so I didn't participate in, I didn't go into anyone's synagogue or anything and be an intruder. But what I did was when the time the service was over, which was at sunset on the 9th, I went down to the Wailing Wall, and I'm telling you, the spirit that I felt that is I don't know what you want to call it, a spirit of joy, a spirit of happiness, a spirit of confidence in God, a spirit of being a people, a spirit of life. That as the songs were being sung, was I won't forget it. It embedded itself on my memory.
Wow.
And that was August 9th of 1989. So that's the Day of Atonement, the holiest day of the Jewish year. Edith Stein was born on. Let me stop here a second. I don't want to. I think I misspoke here a second. I misspoke, and I want to correct it. In dates, okay? In dates. In 1989, all that I said in terms of dates up to now is wrong. In 1989, the feast day that was the Jewish feast day in 1989 on August 9th was Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av.
Oh.
And Tisha B'Av is a day that comes along each year, and it's a day of supreme repentance. Supreme repentance. I was there in 1989 through the Day of Atonement. And in that year, the Day of Atonement, as I remember it, it happened on, I think, October 9th of 1989. And that's when I was at the Wailing Wall, and that's when I observed all the things. But even the Tisha B'Av prayers, which it's Tisha B'Av, which means August 9th, or 9th of Av. Tisha B'Av prayers, one of them I remember over and over and over again. I've got that book too, a whole text of both the Jewish and the English, and I've had them for 30 years. There's a little prayer in there that I thought, I say to myself, say all the time. And the prayer that's repeated on Tisha B'Av is, restore us, O Lord, that we may be restored. Renew our days as of old. Restore us, O Lord, that we may be restored. Renew our days as of old. And I say that a lot because I think that has a tremendous amount of meaning for me. But on August 9th,
restore our days or our gaze?
Restore. All right. Restore us, O Lord, so that we may be restored. Renew our days, D-A-Y-S, as
Okay.
of old.
Mm.
Over and over and over again, it's sung, huh? And the Tisha B'Av ceremony, and so uh, and so that was August 9th of 1989, and then I on that day, just because we mentioned it before in the show here, on that day I concelebrated liturgy on the Mount of Olives at the Church of Dominus Flevit, Jesus Wept, and overlooking all of Jerusalem. I concelebrated with George Abelka, who I mentioned, and Elias Shakur, who later became Archbishop of Galilee, and Mairead Corrigan Maguire, and a lot of other people too.
Wow.
So anyway, August 9th has always been a very critical day because that's the day I was ordained. That's the day of Hiroshima. That's the day of Nagasaki. And so when I saw that date on the page, you can get a sense of it now. I just stopped and I went and read everything there was to read on Edith Stein, and we named our daughter Benedicta, Theresa Benedicta, after her, and that's why. And then life went on until having had 13 children, in that moment 12, we knew how to child-proof a house in terms of medicine. The medicines were kept in high places behind doors that little children couldn't reach.
Mm-hmm.
But evidently, one of the children knew one of the older children, the ones who were 18, 19, whatever, went and got himself which is all right, got himself some Tylenol because he was feeling sick. And then Benedicta obviously was watching at 2 now. And she saw this, and evidently in her little mind, she said, oh, if he can get that, why can't I get it? And she managed to somehow put chairs and boxes or whatever she put together and take the Tylenol off of the top shelf, very high, almost to the ceiling shelf, which was behind a closed door. And then we did not know this at the time. My wife and I were at that, so she took the bottle down. And what we found out later that day, she evidently thought it was like candy, and she took the pills as if they were candy to the point of a 19 times toxicity rate. And when she started out of nowhere, when she looked strange, the thought was she was just sick like some of the other children. But when she got floppy, at that point we took her to the hospital, Cardinal Cushing Hospital here in Boston, here in Brockton. And then after several hours, they couldn't figure out what was happening to her, but she was unconscious, and they figured they found the 19 times toxicity rate, and they shipped her immediately to Massachusetts General Hospital because they said they had no capacity to deal with that kind of problem at the local Brockton Hospital. So she was at Massachusetts General Hospital. This happened on March 20th of 1986, and 1987, excuse me, and she was brought into Mass General Hospital, and we stayed with her, and she was under the care of a Dr. Ronald Kleinman, who headed that department, who taught over at Harvard for so forth and so on, a professor over there, and she stayed there, and she got worse and worse and worse, and I'm sure your audience knows how it is when things go bad in a hospital and it doesn't look like a person's going to recover. The doctors and the nurses have a kind of a nice protocol to try to let people know uh, by innuendo and by, saying, oh, and things aren't looking good and, the numbers are really getting bad, etc. So that's the way it went, Ellen. From March 20th, that's when she went in there at about 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night and I stayed up all night with her. I was surprised that Mary went to bed. They gave us a room in the hospital, a cot, and she was able to sleep. I couldn't sleep at all. I was up all night sitting by her bed, and then next day, all day Saturday, I was there, and Mary went home to see how other children were doing, and then when she at that point there, I left the hospital with Mary, and they were communicating that the child just didn't have much of a chance of getting through this. So I went home with Mary, and this is all documented in 1,000 places in the Vatican and other places. I went home with Mary, and as I walked, the problem was that I was facing was I had a child dying in the hospital, Benedicta, and I had given retreats on gospel nonviolence at that point for I guess maybe almost 20 years. And I had a retreat or a conference on gospel nonviolence out in North Dakota. And normally my retreats were always on weekends because that's when the seminarians went out to various parishes. But this one I arranged almost a year before, and it was on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And the Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday it was on was that Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. March 22, 23, 24. And so the dilemma became, do I go and give the retreat or do I stay with Benedicta, who is, by all standards that we were told about, who is not going to recover? Now, if this were just a retreat on how to live the simple life or Byzantine iconography, I certainly would have stayed. But this was a retreat in terms of what I've been using up my entire adult life for, which was my vocation, to call the churches and the people back to Jesus' teachings of nonviolent love of friends and enemies. And so I couldn't decide what to do. I was in just terrible state. And I walked in the bedroom after coming home from the hospital, and this is all documented and verified in text of every place. And I walked in the room after coming back from the hospital, and there was a book on the bedroom floor, and I just picked it up. And you know how sometimes when you just pick up a book, you just kind of look at the page or something, and for some reason, one sentence jumps out at you. Maybe it's how your eyes work at the moment or something like that, It
happened to St. Augustine, yeah.
How it happened. So I picked up the book, and the sentence that jumped out was from a book by St. Theresa of Avila was, she's talking to Jesus, and she's complaining to Jesus about this, that, and the other thing. And remember, she's the greatest mystic in the Catholic Church, St. Theresa of Avila. Anyway, she's complaining to Jesus about all the problems she's had, everything else, and how come he isn't really helping her out in these things, et cetera, et cetera. And Jesus says to her, and this is the line that popped out of the book. He says to her, you take care of my business, and I'll take care of your business. That's what I read. And I looked at it, and with the certainty, Ellen, I knew that I should go and give the retreat rather than go to the hospital.
Wow.
And that certainty lasted for about 2 minutes. And then I thought to myself, are you crazy? You got a dying daughter in the hospital, and this could be her last day tomorrow. And you're going out to retreat in North Dakota, which requires 2 plane flights, et cetera, and a ride. Take a whole day to get there. And you're going to. Anyway, I went over it and over and over it again. All right. And finally, I made the decision about 1 o'clock in the morning to go and give the retreat. And it was firm. I knew I could never go into the hospital to see her again, to going there. I just go to the airport.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this also happened. And I think it's in all the documents. I'll tell it here too. So I am exhausted. I am wiped out. I fall asleep in a second because I've been up for 2 days now. It's about 4:30 in the morning and the telephone rings. Now, I'm telling you, Ellen, when you have a child in the hospital who's dying and the telephone rings at 4:30 in the morning, you don't even want to pick up the phone.
Right. And you're at home before you left for the airport?
That's right. 4:30 that morning. And I hear the phone and I know what it is. They're going to tell me Benedicta's dead.
Mm-hmm.
And I let the phone ring and it's a guy. I pick it up and I say hello. And it's a guy. It's someone that I don't know. And he's on the other end of the line. How can this be? Let's listen to this. How can this be? He's on the other end of the line. I don't know him. He doesn't know what my situation is. He's on the other end of the line early in the morning telling me that if I keep talking about nonviolence, which is against the magisterium of the church, I'm going to go to hell and God's going to punish me. Now, normally with this stuff, it's water off a duck's back. But under these circumstances, you got a daughter dying in the hospital, and this guy calls up and he starts telling you all the evil you were doing by teaching people that Jesus is nonviolent and that they shouldn't go into the military and et cetera, et cetera. Whatever time that was, 4:30, whatever it was. This was just, I don't, to this day, I don't know who the guy was. But he's calling at that hour, at that time, telling me this.
Wow.
And it just, there was no more sleep for the rest of the night. No more sleep for the rest of the night. I think the doctors called later on in the early morning and said that Benedicta had taken a turn for the worst. And of course, and I had to just the third time I would have had to redo the decision, you know.
Yeah.
But I did it to go out, and I left. And then I went, I flew out and then out to North Dakota, et cetera, and started the retreat that Sunday night at 7 o'clock. And I didn't tell the people at the retreat what was going on at home because I thought that would just ruin the content of the retreat. They'd never get it, and they'd be hearing it differently. And the obligation was to communicate to them seriously and properly Jesus' teachings of nonviolent love of friends and enemies. And so I did. But when the retreat was over at noontime, 12 o'clock in North Dakota, when the retreat was over and we finished at 12, we were going to have a meal after that. When the retreat was over, I told them what the story was back in Boston. And they were, I was most surprised. They were thoroughly and genuinely, as a group, terribly, intensely upset and compassionate and empathetic. I mean, tears and everything else. And people came up telling me some people came up telling me they had a child or grandchild that died and they know, and so forth and so on, you know. all the time while I'm out in North Dakota giving a retreat, which ended on March 24th, all the time I'm out there, of course, I'm calling back to Mary here in the United States, here in Boston.
Your wife?
My wife, and she's telling me ask how things are going, and nothing's going well, etc. And she tells me her sister, who lives in Wisconsin, Theresa, she tells me that her sister had an idea. And what did I think of it? This was Sunday night. She said, Theresa called and said she had an idea that where Benedicta was named after, Theresa Benedicta of the Cross, who was not beatified by this time, but that we believe was in heaven and so forth. So was a saint. That's why personal saint. She said, why not, since I gave so many retreats around the country for so many years, why not call up the people who set up the retreats, tell them the story, and ask them to set up a prayer tree for the people that they had at their retreat, asking them specifically to pray to Edith Stein. So
now, I don't think I ever heard that part. So it was the people, to reach the people that you had given retreats for in the past.
That's right. That's
20 years. Okay. So that must have been a lot of people.
Over all these years, 20 years. And that was, and it was Mary's sister, Theresa, that suggested that. Wow. And Mary called me. She didn't want to do anything. She called me and she said, what do you think? And I said, that'd be a wonderful idea. That'd be a wonderful idea. Because it just seemed like it was proper and right, see? And the day that Benedicta was born, she's born August 8th. The next day was August 9th. And I had made plans to go down to the Edith Stein Guild. And in New York on August 9th, they have an annual mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral. I had made plans to get down there and concelebrate. Well, I never get down there to concelebrate, but I did get to the little meal they had afterwards on August 9th. And when I told them the story, and when I told them that Benedicta was named after, Edith Stein and so forth, they made her a lifelong member of the Edith Stein Guild and gave a nice little medal or whatever they call it, So anyway, I thought it was very appropriate. So Mary started it off, and some of my children also participated in calling to the different people and et cetera, talking, asking people to pray for Benedicta's healing to Edith Stein. And that's the way everything was. And so the retreat ended at noontime. No, 1 o'clock. That was it. The retreat ended at 1 o'clock. I said noontime, and it was 1 o'clock on March 24th. And then we broke up after that and had a little snack, they call it. But anyway, 1 o'clock was the end when I told the people what had happened and so forth. So I got on the plane and I came back and just saying rosaries all the way and Divine Mercy chaplets, etc. And so I get back and I get back and Mary picked me up at the airport and I said, how's Benedicta? And Mary said, the doctors are saying she's a lot better. So this is the 24th. So I go in the next day and she's out of the pediatric intensive care unit. She's in a unit with a couple of other children and 2 other children, 4, whatever it was, just a regular pediatric room. And she's lying in bed and she's sitting up and she's eating and she's herself. It's the 25th, the Annunciation. I go to mass that morning. And so one thing led to another. And I was telling, and right when I was there, this nurse came in. And she went to the top of Benedicta's bed and she screeched, oh my God. She said, when I went off duty the day before, She said, she was almost dead. I was certain she was going to die. Look, she's up. At any rate, what took place was that about 4 days later, oh no, then they called us in the next day, the 26th, and they gave us an incredible regimen of medications Benedicta had to take, because in the process of the liver damage that was done by the Tylenol and the closing down of the liver, all kinds of other things had set in that had to be taken care of in terms of lungs and blood and everything else. And they said that these things had to be, the regimen had to be strictly followed, and et cetera, et cetera. Ellen, Benedicta left that hospital 5 days later or whatever it was. Huh? I got a picture of it with the balloon. She's pressing the button to the elevator she's going down in, and she never took an ounce of medication. Everything was healed. Everything.
Amazing. Amazing.
Absolutely everything was healed. And she was perfectly healed that morning, but they kept her in there because they couldn't figure it out. They, relapse and stuff. So that was that.
Okay, Charlie, I don't want to cut you short, but I have to leave in a couple of minutes.
Okay, I'll finish it up. And after that, I gave the editor of the Maine Catholic paper heard about it because I asked people to pray up in Maine. They heard about it. He heard about it. Asked me to do a story. I said no because we never had the children open to publicity. And then Mary said, well, a few hours later, she said, why not if it's a miracle by Edith Stein? He wrote the story of Benedicta. Carmelite Digest picked it up from there. And then they asked me to get, Carmelites asked me after they picked the story, would I get the medical records out of Mass General Hospital that they could look at? And I got them out, and as I was sitting here waiting for them to come and get them, I was browsing through them. And this is in the movie that I sent you, the video. I was browsing through them, and there on March 24th, at 10 o'clock in the morning, the doctors come in. There's like 2.5 pages of things that are wrong with Benedicta. They come in at 2 o'clock on the afternoon of March 24th, and all that's written there is, this child has made a remarkable recovery. Report will have to follow. 2 o'clock Boston time is 1 o'clock North Dakota time when the retreat ended. So I'll stop there, Ellen, because you've got to get to church and talk to God about stuff,
I do. I just thank you so much for telling the story, Charlie. Amen. Hallelujah. It's great to be able to do a podcast about a miracle and the hope that can give us. And so if anything, like, what do you think is the significance of this miracle in your life and for the church? And I mean, how do you sum it up? What does it mean?
Rene Loretan, a priest, who was the Mariologist of the second half of the 20th century, in talking about visions, he says when you look, when there's a vision confirmed by the church, every aspect of that vision is very, very important. Not just what generally is there, every aspect, and so forth. How could, and I would attribute the same thing to a miracle. How can it possibly be that this spectacular reality, which the Harvard Medical School can't account for, Mass General can't account for, the medical team, as you saw in the video, in Rome can't account for, this miracle takes place in the context of, totally takes place in the context of my, and the families of my teaching the children the Jesus teachings and nonviolent love of friends and enemies, and teaching that to the church and to whoever will listen for 20 plus years. How can it possibly be that piece of what went on is ignored? And simply, that's not important. Well, I don't know. But anyway, it was, but that's not the point. The point is Benedicta is healed. And now when she now I guess you just say, regardless of what your life may be or will be in the future and so forth and so on. As I said to one of the reporters that wrote the original article in the Church World, I said there was an old Roman saying that when Christians walked by pagan Romans way back, the pagan Roman would say, because they saw the demeanor of the person, they knew the reality of the person, there goes the glory of God. And so I think that's what we have to say in terms of we have to say, my family and myself, there goes the glory of God. Because it's God being manifest, it's God's love being manifest, and it's a mystery, and it seems to me part of that mystery is that the church is being called back to Jesus' teachings of nonviolent love of friends and enemies.
It certainly seems that way to me, and I'm glad. I'm going to go ahead and post the link to your article, Pondering a Miracle, in the YouTube. So it's the only thing Charlie has ever written about it. Please read that and watch the ABC special. And it is a shame that, I mean, for me personally, my doorway into really listening to Charlie, listening to you about gospel nonviolence came from the secular media instead of the church. But it is a good special, and maybe it will open a few people's minds to hearing more what you have to say. So God bless you, Charlie. Thank you so much for your time, as always.
Thank you, Ella. It's always a joy to talk to you, listen to you, hear you. Keep in touch.
I will. Talk to you soon.
Maybe a Christmas break, huh?
Maybe. Talk to you later.
Okay, Ellen. Bye-bye.
Bye.